Hi, my name is Kunal, and welcome to the Geeks of the Valley podcast, which connects with some of the brightest minds globally who are leading their respective industries today to discuss the hottest upcoming industry trends and how their work is affecting the global economy. This morning, from the San Francisco Bay Area, we have the Senior Managing Director of Corporate Venturing and Open Innovations at Honda joining us. He leads Honda's global open innovation initiatives and strategic partnerships with startups. Before joining Honda, he worked in early stage venture capital, building bridges between technology upstarts in Silicon Valley and multinational corporations. Please welcome Dennis Clark. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Glad we could finally make this happen.
And same here. And how are things with you in light of COVID?
Uh, Things are well. Business is picking up. Obviously, automotive business is doing extremely well. We're having some supply chain challenges, but profits are up. It's an exciting time to be in the mobility space.
Amazing. And when profits are up, everyone's happy, right?
Yep, definitely.
That being said, let's jump into the first question here, shall we? Tell me about yourself and your background and how it led you to the path of leading open innovation and corporate venturing for Honda.
Sure. So I originally grew up on the U.S. East Coast and started my career in finance. I spent my 20s primarily in Japan, working in banking and finance. While I was there, I learned the language, got some deep experience, obviously, in Japanese business culture. And I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical a couple of years later and complete my master's in economics at a Japanese university. In 2007, I returned to the US to take a junior role working for a boutique venture capital firm, investing in early stage companies in the Valley. There's, of course, a Japan connection here. So this firm was led by one of the pioneers of venture capital in Japan. And many of the investors in our funds were large Japanese corporates. So, of course, my understanding of the Japanese language and culture came in handy. I'd worked in finance, but was really kind of unfamiliar with startups and the craft of venture capital when I started. In retrospect, this was a really eye-opening experience for me. In just a few years, I had the opportunity to observe and support the firm in making some investments and even see a couple of exits from the existing portfolio in a relatively condensed amount of time. What inspired me the most, though, about this experience was seeing the speed at which technology was changing established industries and impacting the large incumbents. Many of these were the corporate LPs in our funds. And this led me to get deeply interested in how to bridge the gap between startups and corporates and the change that was going on. And it can't always be this kind of zero-sum game or corporates just benefiting passively from investing in startups to do technology sensing and see things that were happening outside of their control. So I really got interested in kind of how to connect on a deeper level what's happening in the startup community with kind of the sustainability and the evolution of kind of large corporates. This led me to the opportunity to work for Honda. So I joined Honda in 2012 to help stand up a systematic open innovation initiative for engaging with, collaborating with, and in some cases investing in early stage startups that were aligned with Honda's future strategy.
And Dennis, you've been working at Honda for quite a while now. How has, in your opinion, the startup and venture ecosystem changed since you began your work there?
Yeah, so lots has changed. Looking back, as I mentioned, I joined Honda in 2012. To provide some context, the iPhone was 4 years old. The mobile revolution was in full swing. At the time, though, venture capitalists and investors weren't that interested in automotive. And the amount of corporate venture activity outside of kind of major technology companies was relatively low. In just a few short years, though, technology and business model innovation from the mobile platforms, coupled with advancements that were happening in artificial intelligence, bled over to more traditional industries like automotive. Um, and so this, all of a sudden, almost overnight, it felt like automotive and mobility became a hot category for financial VCs. And lots of money started being invested in these type of startups, and there were thousands, literally, that were created in a few years. So in a short amount of time, automotive suppliers and manufacturers like Honda began to proactively set up startup incubators and venture teams in the Valley and beyond. And this was just a cycle that created kind of more ambitious entrepreneurs targeting the space, more financial investors that were motivated to invest in them. So fast forwarding to today, corporate venture capital investment is at all-time highs. Mobility is a huge category for investors, and these days, primarily later stage. Both financial and strategic investors alike are not just investing in software businesses, but they're also investing significantly in more capital intense areas like hardware and deep tech. Conversely, today, the most traditional industries recognize that things like software and network effects are resetting the playing field in their industries. And they're starting to invest in those areas as well. And this was certainly not the case 5 or 10 years ago. More recently, I think when we drill down and specifically talk about what's changed in early stage startups and the mobility ecosystem, the SPAC IPO has changed the game considerably. And it's provided kind of much needed capital infusions from retail investors in the public markets into later stage mobility startups. And these were companies that many of which had tapped out growth stage VC and were not able to reach escape velocity for a traditional IPO, primarily due to kind of lack of deployments or scale or even profitability. So the SPAC IPO has come along and given these these mid-stage, I would say, mobility companies more runway to commercialize their technology. And in some cases, it's provided their investors a pathway to an exit and financial return. So the question, I guess, remains, I think we all believe the SPAC IPO is here to stay, but what it will look like and how it will hold up over the long run is still an open question.
So, Dennis, I know when we were speaking earlier, we spoke about the Honda Innovations operating model and this new, type of evolution based on externalities. Could you elaborate more on this?
So Honda's approach to leveraging outside innovation and venturing has evolved and changed over time. These changes are mainly influenced by what's happening externally in the venture ecosystem, as well as things inside of the company. So we initially began as a small corporate venture capital unit and eventually pivoted to what is today Honda Innovations, a freestanding independent company that is a spear tip of innovation and venturing for Honda globally. But again, we're today at an inflection point in this journey. And to describe this, perhaps it's best that I step back and share context as to why we're at that point. So basically, we've been kind of in the golden age of mobility over the last 7 to 10 years, where billions of dollars of VC investment have gone into hundreds, if not thousands, of early stage mobility startups, and essentially case technologies and case businesses. And what I mean by case is connectivity, autonomy, shared, and electric related technologies and businesses. So this space is now really maturing as large partnerships begin to form around some of these startups that are the perceived winners. And big companies and startups together are trying to now realize the benefits of case in the transportation sector. So we can actually see this if we look at the funding data. If you use a PitchBook or a Crunchbase or something, and you take a look at the number of early stage mobility startup deals, it's actually decreased over the last couple of years. But conversely, larger amounts of capital are going into less but more mature companies. And this is what I mentioned, the perceived winners. And many of these startups have large corporate partners. So Honda's investment alongside of GM, General Motors, in cruise automation in the robotaxi domain specifically is a great example of this. This is not to be said there aren't problems that still exist in automotive and transportation and realizing this vision that we've all had over the last 10 years and we're now realizing. There's certainly room for early stage startups to come in and do things in electrification and sharing in autonomy. However, for Honda Innovations as the spear tip of innovation, we're beginning to shift our thinking, shifting from thinking just about kind of and focusing on all of this activity in automotive and mobility, and thinking about the next big things that can impact our business. And this includes areas within mobility, as well as looking beyond at broader areas like energy, climate, and even other areas adjacent to our business that may not be so obvious.
So, Dennis, case is no longer the next big thing today when it comes to maturing as a category. So, how do you view the state of mobility as of today?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked this question because we've actually put a lot of thought into this. And in doing so, we've kind of created our own internal framework based on our experience for mapping out what I'll call the operational domain for the next generation of startups to contribute to transforming mobility. And our framework defines the attributes of these startups as seamless, tangential, enabling, and profitable. And if we use the first letters of each of these four words, we can come up with the acronym of STEP. And we basically just juxtapose this acronym of STEP with CASE. So as an acronym, STEP pays homage to the Gartner hype cycle. I'm sure that many of your listeners are familiar with this. And the step-like movement that is required to advance technologies from one part of the curve of the hype cycle, the trough of disillusionment in this case, to the slope of enlightenment, to actually get them to mass adoption in terms of customers and profitability and products. So I'll spare you the deep dive description of STEP. Maybe we can provide in the show notes, if you have them, a link to an article that we wrote about STEP specifically in automotive news and describing this concept. I'd love to pick out those two specific examples and attributes to highlight this a little bit better, if you don't mind.
Sure, please tell us more.
So the first attribute that we've identified is what we call seamless. And this is really about a new set of startups that are emerging, that are abstracting away actions and effort to satisfy our insatiable desire for kind of faster and ever more convenient everything. And this is really about our expectations for service in the digital world as a consumer are actually spilling over to the physical world. And so seamless is this concept. How can startups take advantage of that happening? And I'll give you an example, right? So we're all in COVID sitting behind our computers for hours a day working, and we're extremely impatient if it takes us, more than a second to load a web page, right? So the level of standard of service from a digital perspective is very high. And this is spilling now over into our expectations for things in the physical domain. And one example of this is instant delivery startups. So over the last 6 months, we've seen literally billions of dollars going into a new category of delivery companies that are doing instant delivery, that are basically vertically integrating themselves and placing small dark stores within a mile or 2 miles of customers in urban areas to be able to get those customers products in less than 15 minutes. And that's an example of, again, this trend that we're seeing And it leverages specifically logistics and mobility and kind of transportation to be able to bring this digital world experience into the physical world. Another attribute that we're seeing in startups in kind of this in new mobility, if you will, is something we call tangential. And tangential is basically that the second order effects of case. So startups are creating new products and services that essentially ride the ripple effects of case technologies into other sectors. So, for example, real estate, infrastructure, and even kind of other forms of transportation like marine and aviation, which are two areas of Honda's interest. So here, the rise of vertical takeoff and landing startups and even electric propulsion for aviation, there are a bunch of now startups emerging in that domain, are great examples of the kind of principle of tangentiality rather happening and creating a new set of startups in mobility. And this, again, is primarily, in the case of eVTOL, they're leveraging innovation and money flows that are going into batteries and motors, primarily for four-wheel vehicles or for robotics, but essentially putting those into an aviation form factor.
Dennis, like you had mentioned, there's so many startups emerging in their respective domains today. Where do you see the new opportunities for startups to diversify and create that value add in automation?
Yeah, so automation is an area that we look at a lot, not only from the standpoint of our vehicles and mobility as a service, and ultimately delivering an automated vehicle in a personal car form factor to a customer, which is still many years away. But we also look at automation from the perspective of our factories. And obviously, there's a lot of need to improve efficiency. For us as a automaker, one of our core competencies is our manufacturing prowess. And so there's lots of opportunity for startups to leverage automation and do things specifically on the assembly line. Now, a lot of the other aspects of automotive manufacturing are already automated significantly. But there are areas of the assembly line where automation is now possible due to certain advancements in technology. Also, we look at automation in the context of logistics. So Honda is very interested in robotics and leveraging our robotics prowess and possibly acquiring companies in the startup domain that have complementary or synergistic technologies to us. But we're looking at, let's say, for example, the delivery space. We have a pilot project taking place in Japan where we're doing delivery with small robots on campus, Japanese campus, to the student population. So that's an area that we look at quite deeply. Also, I mentioned marine, automation in marine, like thinking about, again, this to touch back on tangential, how automation and some of the things that are happening on road, how that can spill over into other areas of our business. We're increasingly interested in looking at automation for marine. So we sell, engines for boats, and there's a certain segment of our recreational boating population that are interested in having features for their boats to automatically, for example, dock their boat in a tough situation or that type of thing. So those are areas of technology that we look at as well.
So previously, Honda Innovations had a small footprint in Southeast Asia, and recently you guys have gotten back into the region, making a few venture investments. What are some interesting trends and opportunities that you are seeing when it comes to startups and venture in the region?
Yeah, so first of all, Southeast Asia is a huge market, and Honda has a leadership position in the motorcycle space in this region in countries like India and Malaysia. And obviously, with a huge growing middle class, it's a very interesting market for us. So as the innovation arm of Honda, we're very much interested in what's happening there. And as a matter of fact, we recently made an investment, an LP investment in a venture firm, Real Tech Ventures, that's investing in kind of deep tech startups applying their technologies to markets in Southeast Asia. So they've kind of become our eyes and ears on the ground for what's happening there. But there's a few things that we find really interesting, and some of them are driven by startups. One of which is the swappable battery space has really kind of kicked off. And obviously, the kind of leader in this domain today is a startup that will soon be public, but Gogoro, which of course started in Taiwan. But we're seeing lots of other companies in other regions begin to create businesses around swappable batteries and energy for both two-wheel and three-wheel vehicles in Asia. And of course, this is our bread and butter, so we're watching this very, very closely. And we've actually developed technologies. We have our own swappable battery technology that we're planning to bring to these regions. And we have some pilot projects and things in place as well. So we're obviously looking for partnerships and startups that can help accelerate our activities in this domain. Obviously, mobility as a service is significant. Going back quite a few years, we did make a small investment in Grab, and we have a variety of relationships with the large mobility as a service players there. Energy as a category, energy, water, some of these other areas are also of interest to us, and we're looking at those deeply in the context of Southeast Asia and thinking through, are there opportunities that for kind of to leapfrog, right? So when we think about the smartphone and how that essentially enabled some populations there to leapfrog beyond the mobile phone, like what's the equivalent of that in transportation or energy or some of the other sectors that we're in or that we're interested in? Those are areas that we're poking around in as well.
So Honda's motto is the power of dreams. What are the next steps for the innovation team? Are there any new areas that you are exploring? Perhaps returning to a potential full-fledged CVC?
So the power of dreams is a philosophy that's rooted in Honda's entrepreneurial spirit as a company. And being entrepreneurial really means evolving. And over time, as the spear tip of innovation for Honda, we've evolved in terms of how we operate and what we focus on. So I mentioned earlier that we're increasingly looking outside of our core areas of business into adjacencies, areas like aviation and marine and robotics. We're also, as a company, we've set this year some very bold targets in terms of electrification and carbon neutrality. So Honda is the largest manufacturer of internal combustion engines in the world. And we basically this year came out and said that by 2040, we're going to phase everything out and it will be electric or fuel cell based. And these are bold targets that we need help with as a company. We have our own core competencies, but we need to leverage the expertise and innovation of outside innovators, and startups can help us here. So we're putting a lot of effort into looking at climate tech, electrification, and things that can help us hit some of these bold targets that we have around carbon neutrality. Today, we don't have a dedicated CVC fund. Everything that we have done is off balance sheet. And of course, we do lots of non-dilutive collaborations with startups. And that hasn't stopped us from making important investments and seizing opportunity. That being said, the industry is changing quickly, and we're considering new models that can give us added flexibility and capabilities to partner with the boldest and brightest innovators. At some point, we may decide to return to a more traditional CVC fund structure, but we'll see how things go over the course of the next year or two.
Dennis, to wrap up our call with our last and final question for the day, what piece of advice would you give to people out there from the journey you have had so far in life?
Yeah, so two pieces of advice I can think of. The first is to follow your passion and interests, and look for opportunities to connect personal interest and intellectual curiosity with ways that you can skill up professionally or uncover new professional opportunities. So I was always passionate about cars and mobility as a kid. I knew that at some point that would intersect with my career. Um, and my hobbies and intellectual interests brought me to Japan in my 20s. And I've been able to leverage that experience and skill set that I obtained there to work for one of the world's largest car companies in this incredible time in which we live in mobility and transportation. Um, the second piece of advice would be that it's a destination, and it's about the road that gets you there on the journey, and to have fun and enjoy yourself and treat people well. And all that will come back to you and your business partnerships and everything that you do. And so I really believe in serendipity and making sure throughout business that we treat our business partners and customers and stakeholders with respect, and do good things.
And Dennis, for individuals who want to maybe share deal flow with you or potentially catch a cup of coffee with you, what would be the best point of contact?
Sure. So we have a website. First of all, I'm a big fan of coffee and grabbing coffee wherever I may be in the world with entrepreneurs or ambitious venture capitalists or other people in the ecosystem. So feel free to reach out. The best way to reach us is our website. We have a website that has our team listed and links to our LinkedIn and a general email address to get in touch with us. So by all means, if you're an entrepreneur or an investor that are investing in the domains that I mentioned and interested in connecting, we'd love to hear from you.
Dennis, it was a pleasure having you on Geeks of the Valley, and thank you so much for joining us.
Likewise, thank you.